Bismillahirrahmanirrahim wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Peace and love, y'all's brother Ali. Welcome to the Travelers Podcast. The guest that we have today is incredible. B plus Brian Cross is, one of the most iconic, legendary, and important hip-hop photographers, filmmakers, authors, curators of culture, one of the tastemakers of the culture of modern times. And I'm honored to know him. I'm honored to work with him. I struggle with where to start. So B plus comes from Ireland. And, if you're not familiar with the struggle of the Irish people and also their deep solidarity with oppressed people all over the world, it's something that I've walked around knowing about, knowing was a thing that exists, something that I should learn more about. But honestly, the history of the Irish struggle is one that I've been diving into more. And my time with B plus and his father have really helped me with that. So B plus came up in Ireland, with all of this revolutionary spirit, with all of, him and his people and his family's spirit to survive and thrive and hold on to what's most important in life. And obviously, really undeniably was drawn to hip hop. There was a moment that he described to me where he saw Public Enemy performing in Ireland, and he looked over on the side of the stage, and Sinead O'Connor is standing there rocking out. And this is long before she was, the global superstar that she became, but they knew her. And there she was standing on the side of the stage, rocking out to Public Enemy. You know what I'm saying? And if you've never seen, we all know Nothing Compares to You. We all know that Sinead O'Connor jumped on Saturday Night Live and ripped up a picture of the Pope and all sorts of things that she did to make beautiful music and stand up for truth. But search online and see if you can find Sinead O'Connor freestyle rhyming, talking about the man-made potato famine that the British imposed upon them, and also her relationship to uncategorized trauma in the body. That she says, all this culture and all this history was taken away from us. And so they left us with things like alcohol, and then they call us alcoholics. But this is all unprocessed, undigested trauma that's alive inside of our bodies that we don't know what to do with because we don't have the context. This is her in the 90s doing this. Getting on the mic with the bald head, spitting and rhyming. So, this is just one small element and just one little small picture of what's going on in Ireland. The revolutionary spirit, the cultural spirit, the spiritual life in Ireland. It's amazing. And it's something that I'm just starting to dip my toe into. And so it's something that I really plan to focus more on and explore more. But so B plus, he'll describe in the story, but he, in art school, ended up being in Los Angeles. And in LA, he started photographing hip hop. And he did some of the most iconic, he literally, in his camera, he's captured images of everybody from Eazy-E to Tupac to Ice Cube to Dr. Dre to, all of these great. But he spent a tremendous amount of time with some of the cultural icons and legends for us. People like Freestyle Fellowship, people like Jay Dilla, people like MF Doom, people like Mad Lib, and Dilated Peoples, and this element of hip hop, DJ Shadow, all these elements in hip hop in the West Coast particularly that just are so iconic to us. Also, if you remember that there was The Source, obviously everybody remembers, but Rap Pages was something that came along where people were looking to create an alternative to The Source. And Rap Pages was grittier, and it just had this energy to it that was incredible. So, B plus was, I believe he was the photo editor for Rap Pages. So even if he didn't take all of those photos, he was the person that helped communicate that visually. And he's just done so much. He's made documentary films. He also is an immense collector of records. So, there's way too many stories that we could tell about this man. And, his record collecting, for example, ended up with him exposing records and exposing entire lineages of records to people like MF Doom and people like Madlib and people like Dilla and others and Jurassic 5 and others, like people that are known for their digging. He's one of the people that does that. His records were some of the ones that, he has a very close relationship with Damian Marley. So you'll hear him talk about how he's also influenced some of those moments. So there's so much. He made a documentary film called Keeping Time. And then he made another one called Brazil in Time. And we know that there was a time when hip hop artists like Madlib and like Jay Dilla and like Oh No and others started really looking towards Brazil. And B Plus had a role to play in that as well. And he ended up being connected to us directly because he started working with a legendary artist called Arthur Veracai. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing the name, but I think I might have it right. This is one of the foundational artists in Brazilian music, which is jazzy and soulful, and it's amazing. It's everything that, as a hip hop head, it's everything we love about music. It's just funky and beautiful and lush, and it brings in all these different elements. And I mean, B Plus fell so in love with this culture that he actually ended up spending long periods of time there. He married a Brazilian woman. So he's got a daughter who's Brazilian and Irish and splits her time between California and Brazil. And just, I mean, this human being is incredible. He is amazing. And he's got stories galore. And, I've always known who he was and always had a deep, profound love and respect for him. And so when we started to make when we actually finished the new album that we have coming out called Satisfied Soul, 6 of those songs are streaming right now. So you can go and check them out. Actually, a few of the songs are in my top 5 on Spotify, which when you've been making music 25 years, that's dope. So shout out to y'all for running these numbers up and letting me know that like you're listening to the new music right along with Uncle Sam, Goddamn, and Forrest Whitaker and all that other stuff. That means so much to me and Ant. We appreciate it. But when we started to think about how to communicate this album visually, we reached out to the great, legendary Brent Rollins, who we'll have on this show soon. Brent Rollins is somebody that worked along with B Plus over and over and over again. The two of them have worked on all of these incredible projects together and been part of so much iconic, amazing documentation of the culture of hip hop that shaped it in film, in magazines and publications and all of this stuff. So we reached out to Brent Rollins. Brent Rollins started doing the design and he said, okay, this has to be a photo thing of you in Istanbul. We got to get B Plus out there. And I think I actually said B Plus's name. And he said, yes, that's the dude. I really want B to do it. So B Plus came to Istanbul, and not only did he come, but his father came from Ireland to come and spend a week with us. And so it was me and B Plus and his dad. Shout out to the great Dick Cross. Sir, we love you. We respect you. We miss you. The streets of Üsküdar, the streets of Istanbul, miss you dearly, sir. Man. And the three of us just mobbed all over the city of Istanbul for almost a full week. It was one of the most beautiful experiences. And I mean, they told me all these stories, told me all about, Irish history and culture and resistance and revolution and, man, amazing. We could do an entire podcast episode with Mr. Dick Cross, with B Plus's dad. But then these photos just came out so beautiful. We had this crazy story happen. We're going to put out a mini documentary about it because, cars breaking down and us getting stuck in traffic and there's goats walking through the street and, we're trying to get to all these crazy places. A beautiful, beautiful experience. But all of what I'm saying now was the conversation I intended to have with B Plus. And then when we set it up, now it's like, oh no, B Plus is in LA as LA is on fire. So the conversation that we ended up having, it's like, you got to be in the moment with your friends. You can't be like, hey, okay, let's pretend you're not in no, this is a guy who documents what's happening in moments. And so when you sit with someone like that, you got to talk about that. So we're actually going to break this one into 2 sections. But a lot of what we do, especially in the beginning, and we go all into the journey, but a lot of this is going to be dealing with the fire, the effects of the fire. You'll hear him coughing and clearing his throat because, I mean, literally this man is living in a city that a lot of it is on fire. You know what I'm saying? And there's smoke everywhere. You're going to hear helicopters going over and airplanes. You're going to hear all of this stuff. And then him processing in real time the way that the difficulty that he's seeing, the way that people are coming together. When we recorded this, we had just got the news that that Madlib, the great Madlib, one of the greatest producers of all time, that his house actually burned down. So you'll hear him refer to people by their first names, and you hear him talk about Otis. He's talking about Madlib, and that's just due to their close relationship. So a lot of this is us talking about the fire in this moment, the city coming together. We're talking about Palestine. We're talking about resistance. We're talking about the role of art and culture and music and hip hop as it relates to building community and all of this stuff. It's just dope to be able to talk to my friend. This is somebody that I look up to and admire. He is my elder by a certain degree. And he also is somebody whose work I just deeply respect. And he's one of these people that I talk about all the time where it's like, man, if I ever got to be around this person, I think it would be like we already know each other. And the second he landed in Istanbul, we just hugged and started running around the city like we knew each other. And, that's what it is. And I was just in LA and he came out to the show and he was so excited to meet Reverie because Reverie was at the show. Me and Reverie is my sister. I love Reverie. And so he was like, yo, I can't believe I never met Reverie. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, what you're going to hear is a conversation that happens in the moment. And we do get into some of his history and things like that. But I'm just beyond grateful to be able to share this. I want to give a shout out to the Zakat Foundation, Zakat. On social media, you do Zakat US. On their website is Zakat Foundation or zakat.org. Man, check out their work. They do incredible work with people all over the world. I always like to liken them to like an independent record label of humanitarian organizations. It's not run like a big corporation. It's a small team of people that just work with the people on the ground the way that a good record label works with the artists. And they just try to put some paint where it ain't and see what they can do as much as they possibly can. And for them, it's not about competing to get the $1 billion budgets and all that kind of stuff. We're not talking about, I'll leave some of these names out because some of them do great work sometimes. But with the Zakat Foundation, you're dealing with a small group of people that just do this work day in and day out because they love it. And there's also something dope about the fact that they respect and acknowledge that culture is part of that. So they sponsor a podcast of me talking to photographers and imams and rappers and authors and, thought leaders and all this kind of stuff. They understand that importance of that. So especially in this time, hit up Zakat Foundation, put $5 on something, put $50 on something, put $100 on something, whatever you can. You just know that it goes to actual good work that's being done all over the world. So grateful that you're here. Enjoy this conversation with B+ on the Travelers Podcast. Word up. Man, I appreciate you doing this, man. Thank you. Especially with how crazy things are.
It's been a bit... Yeah, man. Unprecedented. We ain't had something like this heavy since the 90s, I think. But yeah.
So how close did it end up getting to you? And because we talked like a day or two into it, and it was close. And like you were saying, you could see it. And I was looking at on the map, and I was like, I'm pretty sure this is just where we were a few weeks ago.
LA is kind of complicated, and especially this part of it is complicated by hills and stuff. But basically, I was under warning. I was in the kind of group 2, which is like get ready to evacuate, when I was there for like 3 days, and I could see where it was a full evacuation, the go, they call it go. And then the first 2 days I could see the smoke from Altadena coming around the mountain. Our first night was really terrifying, and I drove back from San Diego. I had some friends, and the cats from Brain Story were playing this kind of anniversary jazz gig in downtown, and I really wanted to make it. I just remember driving on the freeway from San Diego, and it was just stuff was just blowing horizontally across the freeway as I drove. And then the car would, the car was getting blown all over the road. And it was, it was like 80-mile-an-hour winds, and it was super dry. And when we arrived in downtown, I remember they were playing in a place in Chinatown. And I just remember seeing those, those kind of planters that you see outside, like temples or big corporate buildings, the kind of ones that it takes like a forklift to move it, or like 4 or 5 guys. Yeah. And there was like 8 or 10 of them in a row, and they were all just blown over like nothing. And I was just like, damn, this is crazy. So when we left the gig, as I was driving up to 2, then I saw the fires. And that would have been, I guess that was like 1 something in the morning. Went to bed, fine. Everything's cool. Woke up in the morning and it was like, whoa, the city was turned upside down. And at that point, I mean, it's only kind of coming out now, but Altadena was already in trouble. I spoke with Madlib yesterday, and
Mm.
they were just like, oh, the power went out. It was heavy winds. And I guess they went to bed, and it was just his son woke him up and said, Dad, I think there's something crazy going on outside. And then they looked outside, and it was like, yeah, it was at the end of the street. And, you know, obviously some people weren't lucky enough to wake up. Altadena is a very special place. I don't know. It's coming out online now. I mean, it's really, you know, it's one of those neighborhoods that if you live in LA and you have any connection at all to, you know, the African American community here, you kind of know about it because, you know, I remember Patrice Rushen lived there. The Mizell brothers live there. Benny Maupin lives there. A lot of jazz musicians live there. And as the stories have been coming out, I guess it was the famous abolitionist's name is it John Brown? Is that the guy's name? His brother actually founded Altadena. And
Crazy.
it was one of the first places in LA where African Americans could actually buy property. And so that just gives you some idea how deeply embedded. And we don't really pay attention to these kinds of things, the way our history works and the way our geography works. But clearly a very, very important place. And it's taken a huge hit, like huge. Patrice Rushen is one of the stories I know that she managed to get out. She got her house was saved. But then everybody else, you know, Madlib, Benny Maupin, the Mizell brothers, JMD, original drummer from the Freestyle Fellowship, all lost their homes. I remember the Malibu fires. I think it was 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Alice Coltrane's ashram burnt to the ground. And how do we account for those kinds of losses? Like, do you know, they say when an elder passes, you don't just lose the person, you lose the library, you know, this sort of turn of phrase. These are libraries, you know, these were real libraries. These were not just on a personal level, but gifts brought into the world by incredibly talented people that we'll never know what they were now. It's weird. I'm still processing, honestly. It's very difficult to, I don't know. How do you account emotionally for that? How do you figure out a way to ingest that kind of loss? And how do you grieve a place? How do you grieve a community? How do you know, I was fortunate enough to study under a great sort of working class philosopher, historian, a guy by the name of Mike Davis. And he wrote this essay in the 90s, which was Why We Should Let Malibu Burn. I mean, it really affected his career. You know, it was like, you know, you be fine in LA until you start messing with the developers. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But basically, that was the argument. Really, is that, you know, that we've got this. There goes a helicopter right now. Mm-hmm. Wow, there's something going on because there's been a number of them this morning. But you know, Mike's idea was that, you know, we've completely chosen to ignore the advice and the practices of the indigenous communities, the Tongva communities that lived here previously, who understood that the land needed to burn every 6 to 7 years. There needed to be limited burns. You know, that there are certain areas that are sacred and that you shouldn't develop. That we need green belts. That we need areas that we can do burns. In a city like this, where the biggest view, the closest to the wilderness, all these things are kind of marketing, real estate tropes. We end up in these situations where these cataclysmic fires happen. And I mean, he wrote this book called The Ecology of Fear, which was the second book about LA. The first book is called The City of Quartz, which is about trying to understand time in LA, really, and understanding kind of the layered way that urban studies works. Mm-hmm. And then the second book is The Ecology of Fear, which is this kind of incessant fixation that we have on our self-destruction in LA. And, you know, fires are a very big part of it. But this year, with climate change, the failure of certain infrastructures from the perspective of the city, it was just a, if you'll excuse the bad pun, but it was kind of a perfect storm, really. It's very difficult to explain to folks, because obviously people are reaching out from all over the place. Is everything cool? Hope you're good. Da, da, da. And we are good, relatively. It's like Madlib said. It's like I don't want to complain. I don't want to complain. I don't feel like it's right to complain, given the horror stories we've all heard and seen. For me to be complaining about my little, oh, the air is bad, or I had to gather all my hard drives together. I mean, seems like nothing, but then it is a moment to confront your own. We will all eventually be ashes, and this is a very keen reminder of that somehow. A moment to reflect on that idea for a second.
It's interesting living in Istanbul. The kind of like looming natural disaster here is earthquakes.
We got that
Even
too.
yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, LA has like there's so many ways you could die minding your business in LA. Like there's no shortage.
Yeah, I mean, in the ecology of fear, where it gets to the levels of just like insanity is where he talks about like we could have a plague from squirrels. That squirrels actually, like rats, can carry the plague, and that we
Oh,
would
I
have
mean,
like
evidence is obsessed with squirrels, and you know what I mean. Like he's told me all about the squirrels.
so we got to come in all kinds of ways, but obviously Turkey in general, but Istanbul for sure, earthquakes is a huge concern, obviously, right?
And it's been that way for hundreds of years. I mean,
Yeah.
you go to some of those old mosques, they have enormous pillars on either side of the minbar where the imam leads the prayer. And they have these big columns that just look like everything else and all of that old stuff in Turkey. It just looks enormous and amazing and dope. But what my tour guide homie was explaining to me is that those things rotate. When everything is right, you can rotate those. And so every Friday, before they do the Friday prayer, they rotate them because they know that if they don't rotate, then that means something in the foundation of the building is off. And so it's like cause for alarm and concern.
Oh,
And so
wow.
that's going back, that's 600 years ago, when that was built. So I mean, that's been a thing. It's
Wow.
interesting, like the feelings that and the stuff that's coming out, like those of us that have had a chance to like not live in LA, but to spend a lot of time there as musicians and to know people, the real people of LA. Like it's really a collection of it's a very working class, like blue collar city. It's traditionally a city of neighborhoods, not like New York, but not unlike that. I mean, like where you are, geographically, it could be a totally different world to be one neighborhood over. Like you could be in a different universe, speaking a different language, different culture, different everything.
Hmm.
So like that being that, but then also, you know, the people that have a bad opinion of LA are talking about like the upper crust of the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
But so the LA that I know, even the people that the transplants are people that went there to pursue some sort of like deep creative thing within their soul. To people like yourself that are just like, man, I have this burning desire to benefit from, contribute to, participate in artistic culture. And so the people that move there is just, it really is a city of amazing people. And I hear from a lot of the people that I know there, like the way that people are banding together is giving this real, like rejuvenated sense of community, especially after COVID. It became kind of like apocalyptic then. And so several of the people that I talk to are just like, man, people are coming together in ways that I haven't seen in a very long time.
LA is a funny city like that, in the sense that, like you're talking about Ev, for example, and I might not see Ev. I mean, I have homies in New York, or I have homies in Ireland that I see more than I see Ev. I mean, that's how far away he lives, like 30 miles away, but it's at 30 miles that could take you 2 hours to traverse in a car. And there might be weeks or months, years go by when I won't be out that side of town. And if I am, I'm there to do something and get back before traffic or whatever. So I wouldn't necessarily see him. But then, I know, in times like this, you know, I know he's there. We spoke this morning.
Mm.
I seen one of our, a mutual friend of ours had lost their home, and he had posted about it, and I reached out to him and we spoke briefly. Um, and that's kind of the way LA works. And then when something like this happens, then it's like everybody reach out. Everybody reaches out for the homies. Like, I know you live over there. I know you over there. There's something kind of extraordinary about the city in the sense that I mean, you're exactly right. Like, it is a confederation or whatever of neighborhoods, and you can be, you're standing 1 minute in the middle of a Filipino neighborhood, and you walk 2 steps over, and suddenly everybody's Armenian. I've always found it is a very generative place. It's a place where, where working class people find ways to survive, find ways to organize. Obviously, a big part of here, especially on the east side, a big part of it is around Mexicanos. The way it maps out onto the city is very different. Generally, the question I ask people, if I say, "Oh, I went to LA, I really didn't like it," I said, "Well, how many days did you spend? Where were you? Oh, I was in West Hollywood. I was out there for the Grammys. There's a very high likelihood. Yeah, I mean, but people go to New York and spend their entire week in Times Square and then never get to Brooklyn and, never
Yeah.
get to, Queens. Make
Yeah,
the
Queens is a
Queens.
universe.
It's a whole
Queens is a
universe out there.
universe. Yeah,
Yeah.
man.
And a very special one, with its own traditions, its own histories, and LA. That's more like the kind of LA that I live in, and we know where we live. We know where we interface, and it has been really gratifying, honestly. I mean, it is. I mean, the challenging part is, when we live in an economy, when we live in a sort of financial system that relies on mutual aid and support, it means that people that have constituencies, i.e., musicians, artists, people that are already living in that world, are going to be able to be helped. And sure enough, like if you go to a lot of folks' GoFundMe's, whatever goals they set, mostly people are exceeding it already. What I'm left wondering, though, is what about those people that don't have constituencies like that? How does it work for them? And that's the part that I think now we have to figure out. So we know we have each other. Now, how do we find a way to help all those that help us, which is the community at large, per se? And that's really should be a job of the government. But unfortunately, we don't really live in that kind of society, sadly. I mean, I hate to say it. Mike Davis, the same guy, I'll never forget. He used to talk about this idea of we live in a post-social reformist world. And this idea is kind of terrifying to me. But I say, well, what do you mean by that? And he say, well, his idea is that it's Reagan. But up to a certain point in this country, you could show something, and if you could show it well enough, explicitly enough, viscerally enough, you could reach people, and it would be like, yeah, you know what? I don't want to live in a society with this many homeless. And then something would happen.
Yeah.
I mean, all the resources would be garnered, and everybody would come to the table, and and the best and brightest would attempt. Now, clearly there are exceptions to that. Race is, the big silo. But there was a notion of a society that if you could show that things were wrong, resources would be brought to bear. And at some point, he said when they closed public mental health care in California, that was the kind of line in the sand as far as he was concerned. Because it was the notion was that, like, we have all these people suffering from PhD. We have all these people suffering from addiction and substance abuse issues. We have all these people suffering from the normal kinds of mental health issues that people run into in a system like this. They are all getting treatment. And at some point you draw a line in the sand and say, no, we're going to revert now to a privatized system, knowing full well what the consequences of that would be, which the consequences of that were. And that somehow we all found a way to accommodate that and not march on the governor's house and tear it down. To him, that was the moment when things changed and we moved into a post-social reformist society. And I think, this is the thing that's hard to explain to people from Ireland, or even England, but people in Chile understand, or people in Brazil understand. There's the hat tip of a so-called welfare system, but homelessness is the easiest, houselessness is the easiest way to explain that to people in terms of visibility.
Yeah.
But is that acceptable? I don't think it's acceptable. I don't think.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately, if you actually ask people in a meaningful way, I don't think anybody thinks that that's acceptable. But
Yeah.
somehow we've found a way to be okay with it.
Yeah. And I love what you said about accommodating it. You know what I mean? Like we really will reorganize our lives. So like I just won't go there, or I
Yeah.
won't go to that place after dark, or like I just won't. Yeah, no, you can't really do the public transportation anymore, because you know what I mean? And you
Yeah.
can't really, like, all of these things that were, part of life and part of like the glue and the culture of a city. And yeah, the fact that we all just were like, yeah, I guess this is just a requirement, a necessity. And like, yeah, there was a time when if somebody was creative enough and passionate enough and was able to communicate a message, there was a time. And I just see also how that lines up with music now. You know what I mean? That like I think one of the main ways that you and I really connect as people is like, the art that we've always that's given us life in the worst times has always made us feel like, no, we're not crazy. And there are other people that feel like us, and there are other people that will organize with us. And there are other people that will, there are scholars that will study this and give us framing for how to understand this and how to describe it to other people and communicate it. And like we can build culture around resistance. And I'm just like, damn. And I'm not even saying this because I wish there was the place where I could go and do my Palestine songs now. And there's just not that really. You know what I mean?
Which is crazy to me. That's really crazy to me. It's for movement folks or whatever. There's always whether it's Bernadette Devlin in my world or whether it's Angela Davis in this world, people say the measure is always Palestine.
But I mean, just the fact, like in hip hop, like where are the newer voices? I mean, of course, Saul Williams is going to speak up. Of course, Yassine Bey and Bamboo and Rocky Rivera and Dead Prez and Immortal Technique and me and a handful of but it's just like, man, where are the voices now? Like where are the voices that are actually can speak to the culture about any of this stuff?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like me and Yassine Bey talk all the time about like, man, obviously Kendrick is incredible, but to invigorate the culture around going after this guy, like, what the last conversation I had about this, he was saying like, people a lot of times are known by their adversaries. Like, who is your enemy? So like Sultan Fatih is the person that conquered Istanbul. His enemy was Vlad the Impaler. Like that's his life's enemy. And it's like, that's a good enemy to have, man. You know what I'm saying? And it's just like, really? Like this is your nemesis? Is like this dude? like Yassine is like the guy who said last name ever, first name greatest. Like that's who you're gonna dedicate like years of your life to. But just seeing like, man, the energy around studying lyrics, suddenly everybody's so excited about lyrics and they want to know the double, triple, quadruple entendres and start reading into this stuff and hours of exegesis about lyricism. And it's like, this is what edgy is now, even for this guy. But not a, as Dr. West would say, not a mumbling word about Palestine.
No.
You know what I mean? Or, I mean, like count the issue. Like, what are the issues? You know what I'm saying? Like, what is it about society that any of these art forms and these genres really have to say at this point? It's like, man, how did we get to this, man? As somebody that's like, you've not only been involved in this, but you're, one of the connectors. You're one of the, centers of the wheel. So like, how did we get here, man? Like, what is this, and how did we allow this to happen?
Wow, yeah. I mean, it's a absolutely central, critical question. I think not necessarily one answer per se. I mean, I think I had this sort of weird experience the other day of being stuck in the house because of smoke, and did something which I guess I had been avoiding it. Like I avoided Straight Outta Compton, but I watched the Dear Mama, the Tupac documentary series. Something has been broken. Something has been broken. A relationship to the concerns and the tradition of resistance in that sense, in terms of the Shakur, not just Tupac, but the Shakur,
Yeah.
I don't want to call it organization, but in the groupings of people around this notion that they represented in New York at one time. The direct links to that now have become very frayed. In terms of understanding history, in terms of understanding your position, in terms of understanding potentially your responsibility, shiny, sparkly things, be they likes, be they jewelry, be they whatever, seem to have replaced in a kind of concrete way the kind of more community driven, the kinds of values that we were. Yeah, it was challenging, and yeah, of course, it would be foolish to say that part of the legacy of what the Panthers represented didn't end up in the sort of street gang culture of the 80s, 90s still. I also feel like that this is taking a different route, and maybe the music isn't going to be the place where we will find these people.
Mm-hmm.
I was very inspired over the last 15 months by the kind of resistance showed on UC campuses, for example. Obviously, also shocked and horrified at the kind of resistance that kids faced on these campuses, the kind of subterfuge. Everybody's upset at the cops until somebody starts protesting about Palestine. Next minute, we can't get enough of them,
Right.
That kind of mentality to me. But there was something there definitely was a moment there. There definitely was a very much an open, giving moment. And it wasn't led by MCs, and it was really led by, at least in the school that I teach in, it was led by young Muslim activist kids. It was very, very beautiful. I had a very moving experience. I went out to one of the protests, and I'm way older than everybody there, and this man was there, and he was just giving out chocolate, and I was just like. But he was more like my age. So I was like, did you just come down here to give out chocolate? And he was like, man, I drove this is in San Diego. He's like, I drove all the way from Simi Valley. And he said, that's my daughter. And he pointed at one of the girls that was speaking. And then he said, that's a very nice kufiya you have. I said, oh, thank you. He said, I have friends in Jordan that sent it to me. He said, where are you from? And then, of course, obviously, the Paddies and the Palestinians.
Yeah.
They know, man. It trips me out. Like the first time that I ever really figured that out was in Jordan. And I was there with Jay Electronica of all people. So a bunch of us, me, Coleman, and we had gone to visit friends, some Jordanian friends. And we went to swim in the Dead Sea. And I had left something I'd left a towel or something, I forget. And I went back to get it. And when I was walking up, it was like too dark. But there was this family and they had a flashlight. So I was walking with them and then we started talking. And then they were like, where are you from? And I said, I'm Irish. And then I was like, couldn't believe it, man. They literally stopped and they were just like, we just want to acknowledge you and just tell you we appreciate you. And I was like, I mean, I'm not used to that. Like I was moved. I was like, I mean, generally you get, people appreciate Irish for different reasons. What I mean? Like,
Like, some people are like, whoa,
yeah, let's have a drink. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you guys are good for fighting, huh?
Yeah, you got cool
or
voices
whatever,
or something like that.
Yes, goofy voices or St. Patrick's Day or leprechauns or whatever. And it was very moving for that family to stop up and kind of pull up and say like, yo, like in the 80s when nobody cared about us. And then we were in the same boat too. Like, in the 80s, there was us. There was, it was a kind of a motley crew, really. It was like ANC was part of it. You know what I mean? Like so that changed real quick. You know what I mean? But like, the PLO, obviously, even ETA, the Basques in the north of Spain, they were part of it. And it was, they'd be the equivalent of being like, whatever they call it now, the axis of whatever. The new word is terror, fear, whatever. And we were part of that. And we knew somehow that their struggle and our struggle were linked. I don't think, obviously the internet didn't exist. We didn't know the details, but we felt it. Yes. And I don't ever remember it being any other way, to be honest with you. In that period too, just going back to the question of the music, I mean, pre hip hop, I remember music doing this. Like the Clash, for example,
Mm.
made this record called Sandinista.
Hmm.
I think it was 1981. And it was a record to really draw attention to what was going on in Central America. And for me, that was huge. I was like, I don't know what age I was, like, I don't know, 14 or 15. By the time I got to art school, we would have parties where people would sell products from Nicaragua and Honduras and stuff to send money to support what was going on. And it felt very much like a part of, you have to represent for those that don't have the voice for themselves. Like that was just part of it.
Yeah.
But it's very unusual. It's funny. I went the last time I ever saw Joe Strummer play, like right before he passed away. He played in L.A. And I went to the show and I was photographing the pit, and there was a Latin girl in the very front. She just knew every word, and she was singing at the top of her lungs. So when the show ended or whatever, I said, wow, I was like, and sure enough, man, she was from Nicaragua. And I was like, man, like there's something very special about meeting people in these circumstances and realizing like, oh, yeah, I went out and marched for you guys. I marched against Ronald Reagan coming to Ireland, back in the 80s, because Ronald Reagan was a genocide, and his vice president turned out to be a genocidal murderer. We marched against him. And then to meet somebody who was like, yeah, well, our family were there. And when the Clash made that record, somehow we found it. And it totally changed my life. It made us realize that people in other part of the world cared.
Yeah.
And you just kind of like, wow, damn, that's very, it's very special. And it was the same feeling meeting this Palestinian family, and it was like a fancy resort. It wasn't like, we were in a, because I mean, I did, when we went to Lebanon, and we went into the Palestinian settlements in Lebanon, and that in of itself, obviously too, was, I don't know if you've ever been, but you definitely should go. But it's one of these things where like they're all kind of unofficial, so it's like the favelas.
Yes, I was just going to say that. Yeah,
yeah.
Similar
So,
vibe.
like there's one source of electricity like 3 blocks away, and then and there's one source of fresh water 3 blocks away, but people over the years have figured out, but then it's all ad hoc, it's like the DIY version of what a city should be, whatever.
Right.
And I just remember being like, that's kind of what Herc and them were doing. You know what I mean? It's like, let's go to the park and find a piece of electricity that nobody's particularly paying attention to, and let's just tap in.
And just make a club outdoors.
Make a club outdoors. Make an unofficial DIY tap in, and build a community around the fact that we got electricity somewhere you would never imagine. I mean, I think honestly, like we were talking about the kind of, I mean, to me, what I would think of as the big narratives, in regards to race, in regards to Palestine, in regards to things like this. But I think the answers are it's in the favelas, it's in the settlements, it's in the refugee encampments, it's in that spark that they took from that pole in that park. It's breaking that off and building little communities around it. I think that our answers, the answers are in that kind of thinking. Maybe that's the trick now, is that it's not about the biggest rapper in the world aiming his amazing lyrical prowess at an issue. Maybe it's about us building a whole community where, in the end, the biggest rapper in the world has no option but to come and genuflect at that community and recognize that for what it is. Kind of what the Zapatistas did, like this kind of decentered, lots of our favorite terrorist organizations do. But this kind of more bottom-up thinking, Dr. West, I mean, one of the things that he said, which has always sort of stuck with me, because it was something that I always thought, is that the way music organizes us is actually the key. It's not necessarily the content per se, but it's the notion that, we are able to do things through music structurally that we're unable to do with speech. Politics is a very, very, very pale, ugly reflection of what's possible by human beings. Music, on the other hand, is a reflection of some of the most spectacular and wonderful things that we can do as human beings. often made by people that are living very difficult and challenging lives. But music itself, as the practice, as the measure, is actually something really spectacular, you know?
Yeah, I think about like, and you've talked a lot about your life, but you told me a story when you were in Istanbul about being at the Public Enemy show in Ireland
Mm-hmm.
and seeing Sinead O'Connor on the side of the stage.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't want to be honored, like she was just genuinely there
Yeah,
as
she was just
a
there.
fan,
Yeah.
you know.
I'm not even sure Chuck and them even knew who might have even known who she was. We knew, obviously. For me, that was, that's one of those measures, like people talk about, the first time the Clash played or the first time the Sex Pistols, but CMP in Ireland, and it was like 88 or 80, I think the beginning of 88. It was right before Nation of Millions came out. Obviously, Chuck and Flav are like two very different kind of characters. And the way Flav dealt with it was like, Flav was on some like, y'all know about Lucky Charms? And like, we did it. It was like, no, what the hell are Lucky Charms? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then Chuck was like, there's something really moving about coming to a place, because you've seen Irish storefronts, where like they'll have the family name of the business written over and he's like, there's something really kind of gratifying and moving about coming to a place where, the names over every business are Irish names. And like, for us, that was it's like a very strange observation. And then he finishes it by saying, because there is nowhere really for me to go where I can look and I can see the names of African-American people over every business. There's nowhere we can go. And sort of realizing, wow, I never even thought of that, man. Like, that's, wow, okay. And sort of having like this nugget to go home with or whatever. Like Schoolie D had come previously, which was also kind of incredible.
Yeah,
Schoolie,
him live in his heyday was amazing.
oh my God.
That was like, yeah.
He's, Schoolie, it was funny. I mean, when I first came to LA, they'd be like, so who's your favorite rappers? And I would always be like, it'd be like, well, Chuck D and KRS.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things I was going to ask you is like, how did you choose LA? Like, you know what I mean? Like knowing your musical, just kind of your musical past, I would have definitely thought you would have ended up in New York.
Well, I didn't choose it because of music, first and foremost. I finished undergrad in Ireland and decided after a year that I really needed to go to grad school. That was, in terms of getting a job, even if the job was teaching or whatever, very few, we didn't have grad schools for visual artists in Ireland at that time. And I had kind of had it was quite an academic undergrad. There was lots of, we had a reading group and it was about ideas, really. That's what I was interested in. And I got offered to go to Amsterdam, but I made a kind of decision that was probably a bad idea because I like marijuana too much and it was probably, that wouldn't work out well for me. Of course, then I come to LA, right? Like, but
right.
But somebody told me, don't apply to the institution, apply to study under somebody. Pick somebody that's important to you. So the two people I picked were Edward Said, who was teaching at Columbia, which I would have, if I had been accepted into that program, I would have gone and studied under him.
Amazing.
Or a guy by the name of Alan Sekula, who was one of the most important thinkers around photography and somebody who was engaged in an attempt to sort of reinscribe working class folks and working class ideas and ideas around class in general back into the history of photography. He was very much interested in understanding the world through a history of labor and labor practices. His work at that time was about containerization, which is a fascinating subject. It's about globalization. His work around globalization, I think, is some of the most important work that's ever been made, really, in terms of photography. So I applied to Cal Arts, and while I was waiting to hear back from Cal Arts, I got a letter from the American Embassy, and I thought it was something. I thought it was something to do with the fact that I had applied to grad school. And at first, I didn't even open it. I was like, I'm not even going to look at this until I find out whether I've been accepted or not. And then one night I came in from the pub and I was like, well, let me just look at this thing. And so what it was there was a green card lottery at that time. There had been a phenomenal backlog of applications, much like there is now.
Hmm.
and a bunch of Irish American senators, we're all Democrats actually, got together and went to Reagan of all people and kind of said, "Hey, look, you have this crazy backlog. Here's a proposal for how we might be able to alleviate some of this." And part of that was that they, you know, set aside some green cards that you could apply for just by sending an envelope. I mean, that was the application process, for Irish Americans, because on the East Coast, it was full of Irish Americans that were living illegally. And so somehow my mom had applied in my name when I was 16. And then when I was 23, I heard back and I'd already applied for grad school. So I kind of made up my mind at that point, if I was accepted into Cal Arts, that I would take it and I would do it. So I was accepted, and yeah, that started it. And that's where I met Mike Davis. And it was really out of discussions with Mike Davis, who sort of said, like, dude, all this stuff, because I was a landscape photographer, actually. I mean, that's what I was interested in. I was interested in, and I mean, these are ideas I'm still interested in. It's not like I've stopped. He's like, these landscape photographs are great, but like the thing that makes you most excited is when you talk about this music. Mm-hmm. And this was like 90, it's the beginning of what people call the golden era, So he offered me an opportunity to go photograph this essay, like summer job kind of thing. Go photograph this essay for me. So I started doing it, and what I realized fairly quickly is the level of seriousness that I was bringing to it. There was cats that, like, commercial photographers that were photographing the scene at that time, but there was nobody doing it as a kind of documentary project. And yeah, ended up in LA. My mom, of course, you have to imagine, man, I was so homesick. You have no idea. I mean, it was really the first 5 years, but like, yeah, like I even 10 years, you could say, it was very, very hard. I mean, it's really an illness, like it really manifests as an illness, homesickness. Like it's like a depression, a low level depression that you are desperately trying to ignore. Mm-hmm. And so I would wake up and not want to get out of bed. I would have days like that, and what my little DIY workaround for that was I decided, when I feel like this, I'm going to do something to make myself feel better. Of course, I didn't have very much money, but I knew where you could buy funk, soul, and jazz records for like 29 cents, which was Aaron's Records on Highland. Go there, and if I found like one Roy Ayers record or a Donald Byrd record or a record that had a sample on it or a record that had a big drum break or whatever, and it was really me educating myself. Like I didn't, it was something to make myself feel better, but I was also actually beginning to make myself useful as a sort of soldier for the culture, if you will. I didn't really think about it in those terms till later, but I've hipped cats to a lot of records over the years, like heavy dudes, but
I mean, can you share some of them? I mean, I know that you had a major hand in the Damian Marley Nas collab.
So yeah, I mean, that's skipped forward quite a bit. I mean,
that's much later. But I mean, what are the ones that we don't know about? Like some of the records that you shared, the connections you've helped make.
Yeah, there's a couple of. There's definitely one big old Jurassic 5, the intro to, I think it's Power and Numbers. That's a Cuban record that I hip cut to. I'm trying to think, like I've over the years, I put O up on records. Otis is crazy though, because Otis has put so many of us up on so much music over the years. It don't even feel right to say like I showed him something, but okay. So me and Eric showed Otis, who showed Doom, who showed Dilla the Cortex record.
Wow. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, that's it, man. Okay, that's doing a lot, man. You do that one alone.
That was a cool one. Yeah, there's been a few over the years like this. I mean, the Damian one is a beauty because he was going through a weird moment where, like, he had made a record that was Grammy nominated, might even have won the Grammy, and the label was doing. It was that era when the labels were reorganizing, and he didn't have a label. And then he was sitting on the hottest song, which was "Welcome to Jamrock." and he trusted me. And then we ended up start this relationship. It's little by little, it's nothing move fast in that kind of world. It's over time. We're gonna check you out, and they're gonna make a decision about like, nah, this cat's interesting. Like he's definitely got something to say. So first I got the word that they were out here and that they were, Damien was working on this, we were doing this super group with like Mick Jagger and the dude from the Eurythmics and like the dude that had done the music for Slumdog Millionaire and this R&B singer called Joss Stone and Damien.
Joss Stone.
They were doing this record over at A&M Studios, which is now called, what's the dude that did the Muppets? Henson Studios. And then we heard that, then they the word was that, Nas lives out here now, which I knew that, but so Damien has been inviting Nas to come by the studio, but they blaze, and then all these rock musicians don't want nobody blazing in the, so they rented a studio, like Studio B. They just rented, so that was where Damien was running beats and smoking weed, and then Nas started to come by. So that's the first thing. Then I got the word like, yo, they're trying to build a record around the notion of a kind of, trying to understand the diaspora, try to understand like that we distant relatives, we ended up in different places, but we kind of was on the same boat. You know what I mean? Like we come from the same place. Like try to make a record addressing the diaspora, which I thought was a brilliant idea. It actually come from Dan. Dan is the manager, Damien's manager, and he previously managed Jurassic. That was how I first met Damien, and it was Dan kind of suggested like, yo, like this could be a great record. So then I just got the word like, yo, Steven and Damien, they know you have a lot of African records. and they say like, yo, like as many files as you can put them together and, send us a memory stick or whatever, a hard drive or whatever. So I did. Of course I'm going to do it. You know what I mean? Like these guys, I'm team Junior Gong. I'm best right. I'm going to take a day out. I'm going to spend my time. So then the funny thing is that while they were in the studio recording the record, we were working on Timeless. Like I had been to Ethiopia, and I would say, that I think, if you like music, I don't care, man. If the center of your world is Wu-Tang and you never made the effort to go to damn Staten Island and wander over there and walk around them projects, what are you doing with your life?
Right.
What are you doing?
Yes.
You go out there, spend crazy money to buy the tickets to go see them or to go to the VIP.
I mean, think about the people that have a Wu-Tang tattoo that have never stepped foot, have never rode that ferry.
You got to go there, man.
Yeah.
You got to go. You got to see PLO Liquor. Liquor, bro. Like that's a real thing. Yes. It's not even Palestinians in there. It's Iraqis in there, but it's a real thing. I photographed in there. So
that's dope.
And I just, I remember in the early 90s, dude. I remember in the era of gin and juice, you hear people talk about riding dirty and gin and juice. If you ain't blazed some, if Snoop Dogg is your thing and you ain't blazed some crazy weed, and okay, the adult version is get somebody to drive you, but even still, like drive yourself down Crenshaw in a car with registration that's out of date and understand what that feels like. Yeah. Maybe you're denying yourself some of the real experiences. And I think, the core audience of obviously of this music is people that completely relate to this because this is how they live. But I'm saying for the rest of us out here, like go and see where people are talking about. You know what I mean? Go to Compton.
It's a privilege. Like every spiritual practice has a pilgrimage. Every spiritual practice has the idea of a pilgrimage that like, if I'm a Muslim, then once in my life, I should see the Kaaba. I should visit where the Prophet Muhammad is buried.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I mean, every system like that is like, you have to touch the place where this thing comes from and you have to try, And I didn't marry my wife because she's from the Bronx.
But then,
but it didn't hurt. You know what I mean? There was something about it that I was like, man, what do your aunties know? Yeah. You know what I mean? like, hey, did you ever, so the second I got to sit with her aunts, it was like, okay, tell me everything. Like,
tell us about the park. You know what I mean? But, so I had gone to Addis in 2005 and I had actually, I went with Will Holland, Quantic, and Miles Cleric, who was running this label at the time called Soundway. and they had to connect. And we were basically there looking for, actually saying we were there looking for records. I was there to take photos of them looking for records, and anything that they didn't, they already had or whatever, I was gonna swoop it up, of course. But and I did swoop up a few bits, no question. But we had a chance to meet Mulatu Ostake and to sit with him. And then I told him, I said, I am going to find a way to bring you to Los Angeles because you don't know how many people love your music here.
Yeah.
And then not even that long later, it was like 5 years later, I was lucky enough to, be commissioned by a big Chinese electronics company called VTech and make toys to put together a series of one-off events in LA, and we brought Mulatu, and that's exactly when they were in the studio recording Distant Relatives.
Yeah. So for anybody watching that doesn't know, that's the down, 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 the main as we enter. Yeah, the first one when you put the record on.
Yeah. But they, from those files, I think there's 3 songs on the record that came from those files. The other 2 are Angolan joints. I don't know. Like I wrote about it in it's not about a salary. Like when Bam and them came up with this, the notion wasn't that you was a spectator. Everybody's a potential participant. There's a place for everybody in this. Everybody can bring something to the table. This is contributory culture. Like this isn't supposed to be. You ain't supposed to sit in your hands and God, that's wonderful, and keep it moving. You know what I mean? Like
you flip something. Find something to flip,
and bring it to the table. Be it knowledge, be it history, be whatever it is.
Wear a different hat that none of us have seen.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Do a different move, play a different record.
Exactly.
Bring some new person around. Bring a punk rock cat to the party or something like flip something.
And so I've always been lucky with records. I don't know what it is, but and. I mean, it just kind of makes sense. Like I just, I mean, if that's going to put bread on my table, then I got to find a way to, you know what I mean? Like I need to be, this can't be just me. It can't be a take kind of situation. It has to be a take give. I'm always available to travel. Like I'm always, especially if it's a place that I've never been. And I have, I love the notion of having networks of people in places that I can, you know what I mean? When Damien eventually did go to, he had gone to Ethiopia, but he had been there for a big concert celebrating, it was Bob's anniversary or something like this. To be able to go back there and to have a community of people around us in Addis that were folks that I knew, that we had built up or whatever, was great. But, the Mulatu thing was, the Mulatu thing is just one of those ones, it's like, yeah, it's another one of them stories where you're like, that was nice. That was nice. I didn't just get to work on the project. I actually got to contribute to the project in a real way. I love that kind of stuff, and I, primarily too because, as somebody who loves the art form, to just see how it works. That's something, not like I haven't tried to make beats at some point in my life. Of course I did. It's one thing to have a Gemini mixer and make a loop. There's another thing. It's a whole other thing to turn that into something that, something like As We Enter, or, what I'm saying, whatever the flip is, whatever the Dilla flip is, it's a very special experience. You know what I mean? It's just nice to be able to sit around with cats and go hard on records and have a shared language of, oh, no, snap, no way, I didn't realize, oh, he did that previously, and oh, he was, I love that shit. So,
do you think, like, of all the places that you've been, I mean, it seems like your connection with Brazil is really special. Like, I know all these places are special, but like, Brazil seems to be. Did you go there? Was your main draw there the music, or was there something else before that?
Like, the way it works for me is I generally, things either pop up or I kind of manifest them. In other words, like I'm really curious. I love the music from there. I'm very curious to go, and then you just put that out into the community, and sooner or later something happens. That's kind of what happened with Colombia. But Brazil was literally Red Bull Music Academy. I mean,
Oh
that's how
wow.
it started. Yeah.
I wasn't expecting to hear that.
Yeah. I mean, and literally it's the third academy, I think.
Mm,
The first one was in Dublin, believe it or not. The second one was in New York. But they ended up having to redo it because of 9/11. Like 9/11 happened right when they were supposed to do it. So they ended up redoing it in London.
mm.
I showed Keep in Time, which was a film that I had made in LA, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then basically there was such a strong response to the film. Bless up all the crazy white nationalist techno producers from Eastern Europe who were upset with it.
Mm.
Um, that they said, we love this. We haven't had such a level of engagement with something, and we'd love you. The next one is going to be in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and we want you to bring it to Brazil. And I was like, okay, and it was one of those things where I didn't really know. I mean, I knew basic stuff, I guess, like bossa nova stuff or whatever, but I didn't really know much about Brazilian music or culture. And then I had this invite, and being me, I was like, well, we're going to bring these American drummers down there and DJs and stuff. Well, surely I know they got drummers down there. I know they have DJs down there. Why don't we do something with them? And then then it turns into roll up your sleeves and dig in and figure it out, But I went down there the first time, and which was August of 2002. I remember we went to samba school like the second night, and that was absolutely and utterly life-changing experience. If you've never stood in a room with 1,000 people playing percussion at the same time, you should definitely put that on your. For any of us that live a life of rhythms, beats, to experience that, to experience something that hits you as hard as the biggest sound system you ever have experienced, but to be completely acoustic is really something special. In much the same way, I mean, in fairness, the European tradition, if you've never stood in front of an orchestra and felt the air
It's
of
powerful.
40 or 50 strings, there's something, it really is. That's a thing, that is really a bodily experience. It can't really be replicated. And it is different than hearing it through speakers, it is a different thing. So yeah, that first night, I remember and what tripped me out, to be honest with you, was that so many of the cats that were with us or whatever, that were engaged in the, that were sort of facilitators on the ground for the music academy, had never been to a samba school. And I was like, wow, that's so crazy. Like, you would imagine, you're from here, like, it's like meeting a Jamaican cat that never been to a sound system or something. You'd be like, what? It's not like class and race and everything else doesn't exist there. It does, of course. And so we set about, that was it. I started to build this project around this initial project, this Keep in Time project, which was, it's really a kind of an attempt at an intergenerational hip hop project, in the sense that, like, in that era, it was all about breaks. And there were certain records, mostly records that had been compiled on the, Ultimate Breaks and Beats. You know what I'm saying? Shout out to my brother. So we used that as a template, and then realized that there was a number of drummers playing around LA, or still around LA at that time, that were nobody, it was the people of their generation were coming to see him, and that was it. Yeah. And that was kind of a shame, and that there was probably a lot of stories, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be talking to each other. We shouldn't just be using their records and not know that they're standing right there.
Yeah.
And so
it's like one of the things that came up for me when you were like, yeah, Patrice Rushton's house. And I'm like, oh, yeah, she's a person you can actually still talk to.
Oh my God.
You know what I mean?
She teaches at USC. She is absolutely, she'd be a wonderful guest here. She's amazing. Man. She's amazing. So we started the project and put everybody in the same room. And of course, people show out, and session musicians are really a special breed. You know what I mean? They're cats that can perform in the most nutty of circumstances. I learned so much from meeting them cats, man. You have no idea. all my diva. What do you mean we have to do all that shit out the window? I've seen all these generals, boss men of their era. You know what I mean? Being like, whatever, man. We here. If
You're
they ain't
right.
got no drum set, we figure out something.
Right.
Oh snap! I need to check myself. Look at these guys. Um, and yeah, so we made a film. The film did the festival circuit. It was the same era as Scratch came out. I don't know if you remember
Yeah.
Scratch,
Of course.
and it was like the perfect companion piece for Scratch, with a number of the same characters that are in Scratch.
Hmm.
13 minutes long, and we would show the film, and then we would do a live show where we'd bring out the drummers, and the DJs would play with them, and it was all improvised. And so we brought that to Brazil, and yeah, started a kind of wow. I mean, when you talk about change your life, I mean, I have a Brazilian family now. Literally,
Yeah.
I have a Brazilian daughter. Well, Irish Brazilian daughter, Gaeli. I love you.
We were walking up
Um,
the hill going near Galatasaray, which is like the big, historic tower in Istanbul. And we're like hitting that big hill. I took you up so many ridiculous hills that
oh
like
man,
after living here
just
4 years,
around
I
the
don't even
corner
notice it.
here. I was just like, yeah,
And you're like, got all this equipment and everything, and
yeah.
just like, I'm like, yeah, man, this is right up here. And but man, we're hitting one of these hills, and this Brazilian woman comes down, and somehow you guys just noticed each other and started speaking.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
and
I can hear Portuguese. I mean, that's the first step to learning a language. And I'm
mhm.
pathetic at languages, honestly. I should be completely fluent by now. I've spent enough time there. Um, but I can hear it obviously, and I can understand it sort of 70%. And I can definitely start up a conversation with a Brazilian and any, but of course, I've also been in supermarkets. I was in a supermarket in Ireland one time with my daughter, and I saw this Brazilian family with their kids, and I went up to the lady and I said, "Oh, you guys are Brazilian," in Portuguese. And then out of the from behind me, I hear this louder voice in Portuguese saying, "I'm really sorry. He's really terrible at Portuguese." This is my daughter.
Oh man,
I
amazing.
was like, "Bro, like, go
Yeah,
easy
my
on me
daughter.
here."
Yeah, so you didn't meet my 4 year or my 7 year. She's 7 now, but man, her Turkish is flawless. And man, all the time when I'm standing there getting deliveries or whatever, I'm trying to talk to the person. She'll just walk up and just interrupt me and just be like, "My dad doesn't really know Turkish. If you really need to know something,
Yeah.
ask me and my sister."
This that there's something about that
Just that
fearless.
immigrant thing.
Well, and then there's that sort of whole sort of fearless, like, I've got all the answers. Don't worry about him. Sort of like 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 7-year-old version of the world, which is just, yeah, it's great, man. Yeah, very nice. Yeah, so that was the beginning, really. Brazilian time was the beginning of what, and we're celebrating. It's been 20 years now since the film was finished. We're actually celebrating it right now, and hopefully we're going to do something at the end of the month. I mean, I always wanted to make a film that I thought represented our experience, but I had never made a feature film before, and I actually made it in this room. I mean, it was very much DIY the way we did it. A product of the kind of DIY, the prosumer era of video cameras and editing equipment. But really, the job of the film was to build a kind of bridge. When we first started to go there, I remember asking the guys, like Madlib and Babu and Chemist and them, J Rock, y'all want to go to Brazil? And fools were like, isn't there like a lot of AIDS there? You know what I mean? Like, it was the level of like what we knew about Brazil
Yeah.
as a community was so small. And, the job was to not only to fix that somehow, which is still a challenge. Brand Brazil is really a thing, but also to build a bridge for a situation where people like Madlib or J Rock or Doom or anybody could go there, make music, work, and likewise, cats from Brazil could come here and that we did succeed. You know, I remember when, just to kind of put it in context, we were there in Sao Paulo when Snoop and Pharrell went there and made
Wow.
that video in Rio.
The beautiful, yeah.
Yeah. And so,
Beautiful.
yeah. And so I thought, like, we were like, oh man, Pharrell's here. He's going to find them records, and then it's going to be a wrap, bro. There's going to be a whole, like, samba
Right.
influence.
He's gonna blow this up.
He's going
Yeah.
to blow it up.
Like
And,
when you go dig for those records and then there's like these compilations start coming out, we're just like, no, you're gonna put my joints on compilation records, and you're kind of happy because you wanted people to know them, but at the same time, like now you're not gonna be the guy that has that record anymore.
Yeah. So we were definitely like, oh man, it's a wrap. Like Pharrell's gonna go digging one day and he's gonna find all these records and then it's gonna be a wrap. No, that's not what happened. I mean, they were there with a very different purpose. You know, they were there to participate and to kind of, yeah, in many respects, to kind of continue the kind of, you know, the kind of Brazil the touristic Brazil that everybody knows. You know, the beautiful mixed race woman, the samba dancer, the football, the crazy steps in Rio, you know what I mean? Whereas we were there on a very different kind of mission. I mean, we were there on a mission to really break bread and kind of try to open up a sort of set of portals, kind of, you know. We got Dilla to Brazil, you know, which was that was very special.
That footage that we see of them in the hotel room with the SP 404, was that trip, and did you shoot that?
Yes. I didn't shoot it. Jerry, like, it was part of one of our crew shot it, but I was in that room many's a night. I was in that room and I saw Otis making beats there, you know what I'm saying? And I mean, it was crazy. Like, you know, it's really a testament to the kind of, you know, like
with that lampshade looking hat,
the lampshade looking hat, the you know, he was, you know, all the record stores had turntables that you could listen to the records in, and you know, and he would be just making these piles, and we'd be like, God damn, Otis, how are you gonna listen to all them records? It turned out he don't listen to them. He's just bringing them home. Wow. I'm like, okay. So his room was just like the bed and then records. And that was like the third day. You know what I'm saying? It was like, Otis, dude, like, what are you doing? We were picking cats up at the airport, and they were, part of the deal was they were going to DJ there, you know? So we were picking cats up. So it's like, you know, there's your luggage and there's your records. Because this is pre-Serato, obviously. And we pick up Otis and say, Otis, where's your records, dude? He's like, oh, I'm going to buy you some records. I'm like, fool, you ain't ever even been here before, dude. Like,
like you have a gig.
You have a gig Tuesday. It's Thursday. Like, you're going to, what? So, amazing. Yeah. So we like, okay, all right. You know, this dude is, well, it's Otis, right? Like, you never underestimate this guy. So, you know, the room starts filling up with records. I mean, there's that scene in the film where he's going, he has dollars and he's trying to exchange money so he can pay for records. But like, it's just the way he does it. It's so funny. He's just like, exchange money, exchange. But you just see these dudes that don't speak English. They're just like, what? But anyway, he figures it out. And I just remember that Tuesday night going to, it was a club called Muji. You know, you know, it was a beautiful thing those days in hip hop. You know, the cats that would show up, you know, it was like, you know, all the heads were there. You know, it was like anybody was there. It's like they knew him. That was the other thing. They knew him, and they knew him not through. You'd be surprised. Like they knew Wild Child. The Wild Child had a hit in Brazil.
Wow.
Yeah, which was a bug out. Like we'd go to the club and like at the kind of, you know, peak moment, they would drop the Wild Child song. And
was it the When I'm on the Mic I Like to Speak for you?
No. It's the song about his daughter. And it's dude, no one plays this song, but in Brazil it was a hit. You know,
crazy.
But that's the key, bro. That's totally the key to all of this, is that, you know, their ears are ready for hip hop. Their ears are ready for soul. Their ears are ready for jazz. But then within that, they have their hits, the songs that make sense to them. Now, they don't even understand the lyrics, but it's just the way it's hitting for them. You know, there's a part in the northeast of Brazil called Maranhão,
Okay.
and somebody in the mid 70s brought a crate of reggae records there, and it completely flipped their whole world. And all they listen to there is roots reggae to this day. And they do this dancing that like you nobody in Jamaica dance like that. You know what I mean? They do this dancing that's like couples dancing, and it's somehow it fits with the way they hear music.
Mm.
And this is, there was soul and disco music that was big in Brazil that never was hits here. There was artists that went to go to, like Timmy Thomas got to go to Brazil and make records in Brazil when in an era when he wasn't that big in the US. It's another part of the diaspora. The conversation is happening whether we like it or not. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
it's like,
Right.
whether we choose to acknowledge it or not, they're listening.
Right.
They're absolutely listening, and they're making sense of it in their own way. And they don't have the big marketing machine.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? The way,
So
the way.
they're choosing based on like genuine
Yes,
feeling and
yes, yes,
sensation
yes.
and
And
yeah.
Otis, his music is not short on any of those things. If
Yeah.
that's he relies on that. It's a very authentic sound. It's very soulful. It's glitchy. It's eccentric. It's this thing. So they knew him. So people was kind of bated breath, like here comes the guy. And the first three records are like 70s Brazilian records. I just see people weeping. I see women weeping like, oh my God, this is my mother's favorite song. And here comes
Wow.
the biggest guy we've seen in hip hop, you know what I'm saying, came here and is doing a show in our club, in our town, because this big drink company is doing this amazing thing that the music industry should have been done.
And he just instinctively knew, you know what I mean? Like that record, it's not like some tastemaker curator took him and like, you
No.
know what I mean? And all those records, like that one spoke to him.
Yep.
And so he's like, this is hot. I'm gonna play this.
But in
Put it on.
fairness
And it's,
to him, by virtue of where he lived, by virtue of the era he would have grown up in, he's tapped into that generation of LA jazz musicians where when Cannonball Adderley went there and Sergio Mendes came to LA, it had a big impact on jazz. So you had Airto, you had Flora, you had George Duke, you had all these people, Patrice Rushen, you know what I mean? Where the Brazilian music came here, it had an impact. Like if you listen to the Michael Jackson records, you listen to Off the Wall, those are Brazilians playing percussion on there. It's
uh-huh.
Paulina da Costa playing percussion on there. And so he was very attuned to that. So ever before, he knew about Azimuth ever before we went there. That was one of the driving forces. When we found that drummer, Ivan Conchi, when we found him, that was for us, that was like, oh man, we doing it. Like now this, oh snap. Like we building bridges across continents, you know what I mean? Like, and then when he heard what Otis had done a CD kind of tribute to his group, and when he heard it, it's in the film. I mean, he just gets giddy, and he just don't really know how to react. And it's kind of like,
Yeah.
wow, this is so buggy, but
Yeah.
it's so cool that he's listening to our shit. You know?
Yeah.
So
And the way
Otis,
they're responding to each other reminds me of that footage. It's very similar to the one with him meeting Dilla for the first time,
yeah,
where they're just like they're so busy honoring one another. You know what I mean?
yeah. No, it's you. It's you. No, it's you. It's you. It's this, and this is what music is supposed to be about to me. You know what I mean? Like I feel like I'm here for those kinds of moments. I've been put here for those kinds of moments where people like that get an opportunity to be in the same room. I don't understand why we work in an industry that is so mercenarily driven by
Hmm.
data and units. And this is music, bro. This is like the mana of human existence, man. I mean, this is what we got to start reevaluate. Like this is we're not supposed to be here. This isn't supposed to something like everything else that we suck as much money out of as we possibly can. All right, whatever. Like I'm down for the revolution. I'll be honest with you. If we abolish consumer society entirely, I'm here for it. That's what I honestly believe the only answer is. But in the meantime, let's just take a few things and take them off the money
Right.
train.
The market block.
Let's take
Let's have certain people that
education.
don't have to be a slave. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
maybe the doctors, the teachers, and the musicians
That's what I'm
don't
saying.
have to be slaves. Maybe they're
No.
not on the slave block.
Oh, maybe the musicians are looked after for the rest of their lives. maybe Cool Herc never has to worry about a medical bill forever. Maybe, maybe, and it don't have to be up to Nas to have some foundation. You know what I mean? Like, let's just make that like part of the mission. That's the
Yeah.
measure of the kind of, and I have to say, like one of the biggest disappointments, of the last sort of 30 years of being here or whatever, like I was in Denver working for Vibe magazine when Obama made the acceptance speech for the nomination, and I remember it stuck in I was sitting there with Jeff Chang, and I remember him saying that, the reason people think that this country is great is not because of our weaponry. You don't see
Right.
people sitting around talking about America's so great because I got these guns or these bombs. It's because of our music and our
That's right.
culture, and so much of it is driven by African American culture.
Yeah.
I think I said this to you when we were in Istanbul, but and I'm sure it's still true, but the military marching band fund is bigger than the entire arts budget for this country. Like, just let that sit for a second. And like I'm from a little, a blip on the western seaboard of the European subcontinent, because it ain't a continent. And it never ceases to amaze me how much money we're able to give to the arts, including me, somebody who hasn't even lived there for damn nearly, more than 30 years. And they can still find, 5-figure sum to help me develop a film idea. There's no government agency for me here in this country that can do that.
Yeah.
And that's absurd to me.
Yeah.
And yet, why do people venerate this country? They don't venerate it for, what I'm saying? Okay. Just something very inspiring that I've seen recently that I think everybody should see. And I don't know if I told you about it, but please see Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, an amazing film made about the Congo. But it's the first time I've seen a history film, an essay film, history film that uses jazz as a way to talk about world historical events and the awkward and complicated and often contradictory way that these solidarities play out. It's a film that exists between two incidences. One is the CIA using a Louis Armstrong tour of Africa to get CIA men into the Congo on the ground so that they can assassinate Lumumba in the Congo. And on the other side, you have Max Roach and Abbey Lincoln organizing, storming the UN to ask for the release of Lumumba. And the film exists in that moment. And everybody's there. Coltrane is there, Ornette's there, Nina Simone is there, Monk is there. And it's really stunning film for all the music heads need to see it. It's really important. And it's nominated for the best documentary in the Oscars, but most likely it won't win because the Oscar voters in the documentary category are pretty conservative, in fairness. But that just gives you a notion of how good it is.
I'll never forget the first time that I went to Australia, not on tour. Like I went there I was doing a bunch of speaking engagements, but there was like time to actually be with people, Like usually I go to Australia, it's like the show in Sydney is tonight, then we get up in the morning, we go do the show in Melbourne, and then we go and I mean, that's cool. But similar to how people feel with LA, I was like, I don't really care for Australia that much. I like the people that are at my show, but I like my people that are at any show. Like these people are here to clap for me and give me money. It's great. But the first time that I ever had time to spend there, I was like, oh, you can actually find the original people, the Aboriginal people, and talk to them and visit their elders and like eat their food and kick it with them and go to this thing and all this kind of stuff, go to their parks and like see all this stuff. And man, when they started telling me stories, and I mean, I've been studying these things and all, and when I'm like, oh my God, these are the exact same things that were done to the First Nations people in America. So the first time when I went to Malaysia, and I was like, how did the Indian people get here? They said, oh, the Dutch put them in ships and like brought them here. I was like 18 or something when I went there and was like, they did that to y'all too? Like, I didn't know that thing happened. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And there's something about the experience of being able to hear it and see it. Like you said, like Chuck D saying, the fact that your own people's names are on the tops of your stores and I don't have that. There's something about being able to compare experiences and notes. And then also, like, how are you all surviving that? Oh, okay. Like you guys plug your turntables into the light thing and then you play all these different records. And you know what I'm saying? And like seeing how that connects to music throughout the diaspora and around the world and everything, it really is such an important element of survival, like not only physical survival, but the spirit that it requires to even dream of a better way of living life. Like there's got to be some sort of hope and there's got to be some sort of, belief and some sort of feeling that I'm not alone in this and there are other people and those people are genius and their genius reflects our genius. Like, you know what I mean? There's just something about that that's incredible. It's something that I think is extremely important, and in a lot of ways, it's the purpose of what we do in this podcast, and that's for me why it's so difficult to see that like the same way that people have started to accommodate neurodivergent people. You could tell a lot of people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, but what if we're all acknowledging in a medical sense that somebody doesn't have the wherewithal to correspond with reality the way the rest of us do. And then we all just learn to figure it out. I feel like those protesters that you're talking about, it's normal to them that they would never even expect for their artists to talk about the work that they're doing. You know what I mean? They would never expect their music to speak directly to that. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
which is crazy.
It's something that's really difficult for me to understand. And I know that there's got to be something on the horizon. It's the only thing that I can imagine. There's got to be something bubbling that I'm too grown and disconnected to see. There's
No, for
always
sure.
some sort of creative spirit moving in the deep part of the ocean of people. And when it comes out, I'm going to be like, yo, you know what I mean?
Yay, there it is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I
No,
was hoping
and
that
maybe,
that
and
maybe
maybe,
you maybe you would have seen something, you know what I mean, in those particular trenches that like, no, they got this thing that they're doing on TikTok or whatever.
no, that's what I was going to say. I mean, I remember when Odd Future,
Yeah.
when they started to kind of emerge locally here, and then of course all the music heads from, my part of the world were, would be the kind of cats that be like on it already and like, you photographing them Odd Future dudes,
I
but
remember Mark Gonzalez told me about them.
there you
I
go.
was like, man, they got a thing happening, man. Like you're not gonna like all the words that they say, but
Yeah,
man, I'm telling you, like, yeah. So
and
we
he
were
was,
ready for Earl. Like we got intel on
yeah,
Earl and
oh for
Tyler.
sure, yeah, yeah. Sid too. Frank Ocean didn't figure it out till much later, and I'm still not sure I completely get it, but there is something there also. But the thing that was interesting about it was I remember it was a woman that helped me at the time with accounting. She's now kind of famous rock climber, but she said, you know what's important about this, and I was like, no, and she's like, it's not so much that because we were like, yeah, I don't know if I get it. You know what I mean? But what she was no, you know what's important is that these are really bright kids and they're choosing to make music.
Mm,
And she's like,
mm,
that's not what all the bright kids are doing that right now.
mm,
And I remember that kind of struck me at the time as kind of like, wow, she's right. That's true. Like we need to celebrate the ones that choose music because, it's changing and it's not the place where the best and brightest and the most soulful kids are coming now. Whether it's
yeah,
that they're dancers, whether it's that they're content makers or TikTokers or whatever it is, music isn't the place that they're choosing. And
yeah,
I just think that's what we're facing now is that a lot of the kids that traditionally would have oriented themselves towards, the arts in a traditional sense, be it music, be it visual arts or whatever, are now doing other kinds of hybrid practices. Culture will find its way, but it may not be in our field in the way, in the way we would have thought, So, and
One of the things I love is like when somebody has opinions that I don't agree with or don't like,
mhm.
and they find a way to do it in art that's so dope that it makes me respect it.
Yeah,
And it opens me to stuff that I like. When there's comedians that have opinions that I'm just like, man, I don't like this at all. But I get it because and that's how I felt, particularly with Tyler, where I was like, man, I don't talk to my audience like this.
Yeah.
It's not how I put a show on, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
For
like there's
sure.
something, and Yassine was up on them super early. Yassine was like, this is punk rock. He's like, man, this is some real counterculture stuff. And to this day, every time Tyler opens his mouth, it's like, I almost like it better when I don't agree. Cause there's just a spirit and there's a way of looking at things that's so undeniably ill about it that I'm like, man. And I told Earl this the first time I really kicked it with Earl. Like, I understand my son because of you. Like, you are so dope. His dopeness helped me understand my son's whole way of being in the world. Where I was like, okay, got it. That's why you have to do so and so. You have to wear your hair like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah, man, you got to do that. It looks crazy to me and my friends, but dude, you have to do that. I feel you. I get it. And so that to me, it's like, a lot of it is that, man, that I'm like, man, looking for the art that bridges gaps,
I mean, I agree. I obviously even past Earl, you got Mike in them. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, it's. I feel like I feel like there's cats that the issue is that there's cats paying attention. There's cats doing interesting things. It's just it's not in the way. It's not in the kind of traditional. In the kind of ways we would have done it, or the kind of ways that we recognize as ways that things are supposed to be done, I guess,
Much love and many thanks to the great B+, my dear friend, my brother, for being so generous with his time. This is just the first of two conversations. It really was one conversation, but we don't want to rush through it. There's something about it that feels like this conversation should have some time to breathe. And we should really honor the fact that B+ sat with us, while his city was on fire. And he talked about it, and he was very present with what was happening, and he was very present with us. And so I want to make sure that we honor it with the time. So we're going to stop it here. We could have just made this one long episode, but we want to have some time as an audience and also as us at our show to be able to process and just really sit with this amazing conversation that we're having. Thank you to Zakat Foundation for sponsoring these episodes from day one, ZAKAT. Zakat US on social media, zakat.org. Go over there and put something on it. It just keeps everything going. If for nothing else, I mean, you listen to this podcast and the podcast is free and we don't advertise a bunch of nonsense. And it's because of the fact that Zakat Foundation has supported us from day one. So go ahead and do that. Get down with the therapy journey if you're into that kind of thing. That would be betterhelp.com/travelers. Don't forget, we got this new album coming out, Satisfied Soul, dropping on the 14th of February. Every day the 14th. I just keep thinking about that. But yeah, man, Valentine's Day, this new album comes out. Thank you for all of your support. Head to brotherali.com, sign that mailing list, like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, all that good stuff. Anything you do really helps. But especially signing up for the mailing list of an independent artist, that helps a lot. Make sure you go and check out B+. Check him out on all of the incredible things that he does. Buy the things that he puts out, support the things that he puts out, and just keep this amazing work going. We'll see you next week with part 2 of this interview, inshallah. Much love to my man, Don Kufi, who has started editing these episodes. Much love to you, sir. We appreciate you. It is not an easy thing to edit these episodes. It sounds like we just sit down and start chopping it up, but the conversation goes all over the place. And so to actually try to make it a smooth and easy and enjoyable listening experience for you, Don Kufi is sitting in front of a computer for hours and hours and hours when he could be doing a lot of other things. But he's doing that because he wants to help deliver this message to you, because we love the people we're talking to. We love the stuff we talk about, and we love you. Appreciate you very much. See you next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bloco.